What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Closing the Deal. I am your host, Sam Enright, and sitting across from me this morning is my co-host, Zach Dixon. Zach, what is going on this morning? How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Beautiful morning. Can't complain at all. How about you? What's going on today?
Doing all right. I absolutely annihilated my big toe before coming here, so I'm in a good deal of pain. I pulled a drawer out and just like shoved my toenail. Like, I don't know if I bent it. There was blood underneath of it. Hurts very badly. So,
You
uh,
break it?
no, I did not. I didn't break the toe. It was more so like it wasn't even like a stub. It was more like ripping the toenail back.
Oof.
Like there's like bleeding underneath of the toenail. So
You
it
cover it up, make sure it's not getting infected.
no, I don't. I'm not worried about infection.
No, I hear you. No, I hear you.
I mean, it's covered with my clean sock. I mean, if that's you know,
Yeah, probably would do then. Maybe a band-aid could do too, though.
I mean, it was really more so just like bleeding underneath of the toenail itself. So like it's like being protected by said toenail. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just did not feel good. That one it brought me down to my knees. Honestly, it hurt really freaking bad. So
Not a good way to start the morning. It sounds kind of like the razor scooter to the shin type deal.
yeah,
One of the like it's
yeah,
just not
just
a good feeling at all.
yeah, 58 degree to the ball of your
Yeah.
ankle. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
just not
Yep.
fun. Not ever enjoyable. So I mean, it feels better now, but we'll see. Obviously, got some walks and some workouts to do later, so we'll see how it feels during that. That's going to be the true test. But other than that, good morning. Looks like yeah, gonna be a great day ahead.
Another 90-degree day on the docket. Keep them coming. Honestly, we're here in the end of July, and we just keep them coming. I don't want them to end. So
I don't
summertime, the end of summertime is on the horizon at the moment. So
I
just trying
don't
to
I don't think that
soak it
it's
all
gonna
up.
continue. I don't know if you've looked at the
I
radar, but
have, yeah.
I'm actually more excited about what's on the docket than probably you are. While very grateful for a great summer, I can definitely deal without doesn't need to be 90 degrees for me. I'll take high 78s, low 80s, or high 70s, low 80s. That's perfectly okay for me. So, but yes, I am starting to get the feeling, not the feeling, just the realization that we are slowly closing in. For some reason, I don't know. I mean, it's middle of July or late July, but I was on the golf course last night. I just seen a couple leaves on the ground. I'm like, this feels like fall golf. Like there was just this I don't know, this feeling in the air. I'm like, wow,
Crispness in the air.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just like we're not far off here from being back to snow on the ground. I know that's like looking way too far ahead because obviously that usually doesn't happen to like at least December, although in my brain it's like October that we get snow,
Yeah.
but that's never usually the reality. But yeah, what can you say, man? The seasons come and go and time flies. So I mean we'll be back to as soon as we get to winter, we'll be back to summer before we know it as well. So just how it goes at this point.
Just an absolute and never-ending cycle for sure. For sure.
Yep. So, but yeah, guys, today we're going to be talking about red flags when touring a home. Thought this would be a good episode for you guys. Obviously, Zach toured lots and lots of homes, and a lot of our listeners have never bought a house before, and so I think there's probably some common things that most people, if you ask them, hey, what would be something to look out for, touring a home, even if you've never seen a home before to purchase. Obviously, I think there's some things that most of us would say, oh, yeah, we'd look out for this, but, try to get in some ones that maybe are a little bit less common and things people don't normally think about while they're focused on these other major items, to kind of always be mindful of as well. And maybe not so much just red flags, but just things to take into account when you're going to buy a house. Things that may end up being an issue for you down the road if you didn't think about them in the beginning, is kind of the thought process there. So, Zach, why don't you take us into some of, kind of what I would consider, major red flags, but also just very common things that people would normally, if you, again, ask them, hey, what's something you'd look out for in a house? These are likely the items that they would probably bring up.
For sure, for sure. Before getting started into that, then another thing I kind of wanted to add to in terms of the red flags is we don't really, when we are going to tour homes and we're looking and we're scheduling these showings and whatnot, typically these showings are going to be, 15 to 30 minutes long. So touching on these items before you walk into the property and knowing that you're going to be looking at these items before you walk into the property makes it a lot easier to kind of plan those items out in that 15 to 30-minute time period, because again, it does go quick when you're initially walking through this property. And you know part of the goal of the walkthrough is to make sure that you do like it, that you, if you do want an offer or put an offer in on it, that you enjoy the property as a whole. But the other aspect of it is to look out for these red flags. And so preparing yourself before you go do that, I think, is was one of the bigger keys, to having a successful showing, and having successful information coming out of the showing. Obviously some of these things that we're going to talk about are going to be found on an inspection report, but to maybe be able to see them before you put an offer in saves you that, $500 $600 on an inspection. If you can see these things prior to putting an offer in, obviously you're going to save yourself some time and money down the road. So I think it just kind of goes back to stuff we've talked about previously of preparing yourself, previous before you get the process started. So some of the major red flags I'd say that we take a look at, on the surface when we go through and do those walkthroughs of property. Number one is going to be structural and foundation issues. Those can be deal killers immediately if there is problems with the foundation and structure of the property. Number one, that's going to be a pretty large fix. It's a pretty expensive undertaking for a seller or a new buyer to undertake with a new property. And then number two, the lendability on the property when there are structural and foundation issues. It's not going to be an easy. There's going to be a path of resistance, unfortunately, when there is structural and foundation issues. So we're going to either have to get them fixed, or going to have to get creative with how the property goes forward. So if we're taking a look at, if we're walking through properties and we can see large cracks in the foundation, foundation shifting, one part of the foundation is here and the other one's here, that's going to be a tall tale sign that there's something going on with some water intrusion, just things of that nature. So that's probably going to be the biggest red flag that we take a look at. We're always going to be looking for water damage, coming from the roof, leaking from the roof. If there is a basement, if we're seeing any water intrusion in the basement, if they have a sub pump in place, all of those things we're going to be taking a look at. If there's any mold issues anywhere, that would lead us to believe that there's been water intrusion that has not been taken care of. And so those are probably two of the bigger items that we take a look at when we're doing those walkthroughs, and some of the red flags that we're looking for to try and alleviate the inspection process, or maybe kind of help ourselves out prior to going into contract there.
Nice. Yeah. And I mean, from the lending, side of things, when it comes to those sort of red flags, like Zach, mentioned about the lendability for structural issues and those sort of things. Like, I know it's a common thought process that, conventional, you can get away with a lot more when it comes to an appraisal, but no loan program out there. I guess it's obviously going to be appraiser dependent, because ultimately they are our eyes on the ground. We don't see the property. We don't set foot on the property. We ultimately hire an appraiser to go out and do that job. And we trust that they're going to report back the information that they see. So if that's something that they do report, in the report, obviously an appraiser is not a structural engineer. They're not licensed to be able to tell us that there is a structure issue. However, if they do come back in the report and mention, what you guys may see when you're walking through, hey, there appears to be maybe some structural damage, some bowing of walls, some water damage in the, basement, foundation, whatever, that's going to cause a red flag with us as a lender. We're going to require to get a professional out there to determine, what is the situation, what is going on, and what are they going to be the, what is ultimately going to be the solution to get that solved. So, that's another thing is, even if that is something you are okay with when you go and look at the house, that's something you need to be, very well aware of and mindful of if you do decide to put an offer in on a property with those sort of things, that could get called out. And if it does, we're not just going to turn a blind eye to that. It's going to be required to be, at least examined, looked at, and, a game plan decided, from there based on that. So.
And ultimately, while you are the purchaser of the home, the buyer, you made a good point there. There is another vested interest in this property as well. When you have financing, there's a large lump sum of money that's being handed to you by a third party, and they obviously have a vested interest in this party. They or in this property. They don't want to see it burn down to the ground. They don't want to see it crumble down to the ground. They don't want to see it fall apart. They don't want to see any of those types of things. So
Yeah.
obviously, as much as you are doing your due diligence as a buyer, obviously the lender is doing their due diligence as well on their side of things.
Yeah. Yep, 100%. Because I mean, if there's structural issues and you're in a position where that costs 20, 30K and you don't have that, who does that fall upon? We've already talked about the previous episode, or yeah, when we talked about foreclosures and that sort of thing. Not only is now have you likely walked away from this property if you can't afford to make that repair, now you've left in the hands of the lender who's already going to take a loss on the money. Now they have to fix the structural issues themselves to get the property back on the market. And so there's a lot of factors that go into it. Like Zach said, there's another vested interest here. And sometimes people don't often think about it that way. They think I'm buying the house, I'm the one who owes the money. But what happens if something major happens to the house and you no longer can afford to pay for it, or you know don't want to? Ultimately, who does that fall on then? It just doesn't just go away. It doesn't disappear, unfortunately. So um sorry, were you gonna add something there?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, couldn't agree more. Just all in all, it's hard when you're a buyer. You think you're obviously center of attention, center of the world,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other moving parts, a lot of other things going on at the same time. So just got to keep everything in check and you know be aware.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, let's be real. I mean, if you ask most people, like, do you want to buy a house that has structural issues? Like, most people are
No.
going to say no, but oftentimes we have buyers who, we've talked about this before on the emotional side of home ownership. We get people that are emotionally invested in these properties and don't sit back and think about it from a different perspective. We actually had a client on the foreclosure house that we did from the previous episode in that example, where there was something that was called out in the basement by the appraiser, and like the amount of like upsetness from the buyer that we were requiring a structural engineer to go out and verify that the structural integrity of the property was not compromised was like, it was just like, if we could sit down and have a cup of coffee and like really sit and talk about this, like there's no way that you would be opposed to this, like when you really sit back and think about it. But it's just like we get ourselves emotionally invested in these things. We want this property so bad and we don't care about it's anything. You know what I mean? I can't tell you how many times I've sat down and made decisions and be like, I don't care about that. I'll deal with that later. Like that's a problem for down the road. And then down the road comes and you sit and you think, God, what was I thinking? Like that was just idiotic. Like I should have handled this then, or at least thought about the repercussions of it. But that's not always often how our brains work, unfortunately. So
That's true. Human nature for sure. Human
yeah.
nature. So touching on a couple of other small red flags that we're taking a look at, when we do our walkthroughs, electric and plumbing is going to be a big one. Making sure that all of the electrical, is working in the property. Obviously, that the electric is on, the electric service is on at the property. We're going to take a look at the amp box and make sure that it's not from 1960, 1970. Make sure it's been updated in the last 20 or 30 years. And then obviously, those are also things that past the inspect or past the walkthrough, and once you go into contract, those are things that can be also obviously inspected a little bit further past the normal standard residential inspection. You can get electrical inspections done specifically. You can get plumbing inspections done specifically, sewer line drains. Camera specifically. So those are things that you can get checked out afterwards as well, but obviously are going to make sure that we're not seeing loose wiring out of the amp box, fire hazards, stuff like that. And then obviously making sure that we're not seeing any water leaks, just checking under sinks and things of that nature, making sure that we're not seeing any water damage in any cabinets, stuff like that. So the last one that I have would be really just like pest infestation. That's going to be pretty self-explanatory, obviously, and if we walk into the property, it'll be pretty cut and dry at that
Yeah.
point too. So um, obviously, but that would just be an aspect of how we bake into our offer. If we do decide that we want to offer, that's just something that we would put to the side as maybe in a negotiable to try and work out with the seller on that fact. So that's going to be a pretty standard, pretty straightforward one if we do walk into a property on a walkthrough and see that. So typically that's a something that scares buyers away, I would say,
Yeah,
generally speaking.
for sure. I mean, yeah, I can only imagine walking into a property and seeing some of the stuff that I'm sure people have seen out there. So, gotta, especially from a pest standpoint, that's like a no go for me personally. Like that's gross. So,
Yeah. I've
gotta,
walked into some flips, seen like stink bugs, like a lot of stink bugs
yeah,
just on the ground and stuff. Nothing like alive, nothing
yeah.
crazy
No
alive, but like
cockroaches,
some
not good
no
cockroach
cockroaches.
infestation. Oh man, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
gross. That would be sick.
Yeah.
So,
But nothing too crazy on my side of things so far yet. So
yeah, for sure. Um, well, guys, going into kind of the next category, these are maybe some less thought about red flags, still things that you would, notice, but again, just something that maybe is not going to be as high on the priority list as like structural or foundational issues. Um, First and foremost, in my opinion, would be like suspicious DIY or like, suspicious fixes, jerry rigging, as some people would call it. We've all opened up a hood of a car and seen some duct tape around a wire or two, you know what I mean, in our time. Those sort of things obviously are going to jump off the page to me if I'm walking through a property and I see, some things that are maybe done less than professionally. It's going to make me raise some questions about, just kind of the integrity of the house as a whole. um, so that one would be one that I would be on the lookout for, just kind of when you're, just checking some things out, just seeing if there's any sort of suspicious renovations or DIY fixes that just aren't making a whole bunch of sense. Missing safety features, so things such as like smoke detectors not being there, GFCI outlets near water sources. I don't know how common carbon monoxide detectors are. I know like my parents have one in their house. There's not one in mine, but things of that nature, just making sure that those safety features are there, not missing, they're in working order. Just something to be mindful of. And then the last one, kind of touching back on the initial one, would just be unfinished or incomplete repairs. If somebody got something started and, did not finish that, what's their plan for that when you're going in and buying a house, or when you're making an offer? Are they going to finish it before the purchase? Is that something that you're going to have to do once you do own the home? Going in and having, those things as on your radar, you know what I mean? If that's something that you're going to have to take care of yourself, or you're going to ask them to, to have done by the time that, you finish completion of the purchase, would be some other things to just take into consideration when going through a house.
And I think the other thing that maybe buyers don't necessarily think about, and I guess honestly, this episode can apply to renters too, as you're touring rental homes that you're thinking about living in. These are all things that you definitely need to take a look at when you're, considering a property to live in for yourself. But I think going back to the buyers and the renter side of things, like these maybe aren't things that you think about often, but they can impact the lendability of the property as a whole. Um, you know, with FHA, with the GFCI outlets and smoke detectors and whatnot, I actually on the rental side just leased out a unit to a Licking County Metro Housing Authority tenant, and we had to do an inspection for that, and we actually had to install carbon monoxide detectors on every single floor there. So again, these are things that maybe again less thought about, under the radar, but they can affect the ability to be able to move into this property, either whether it be on the buy side or on the rent side. So while they may not be major fixes or major things that we're thinking about, they are most definitely things that you do need to think about as a whole, and more than likely will need to be repaired at some point, to get you in there to the property. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I know you said it kind of in there, but there's one last kind of segment, for this, and that was, under the radar, or, really just not thought about things at all. And these may not even actually have to do with the house, the integrity, the structure of the property at all. These are things that I'm sure that when you go and you see something, you're worried about the bones, you're worried about the structure, you're worried about how the house looks, how many bedrooms does it have, how many baths, does it meet all of these criteria, that sometimes these things can get lost, um, in lost in kind of that whole thing. And so the first thing would be, multiple listings in the same area, multiple houses for sale simultaneously. What could that possibly mean for that neighborhood if there are, 5 6 houses all in this one general vicinity, all being put up for sale at the same time? Obviously our imagination could go a bunch of places, but that would be something to think about. You know what I mean? If you drive down a street and you see for sale, for sale, for sale, for sale, for sale, you know, you may not think about it in the moment, but that is likely something you should probably take a step back and say, hey, what's going on in this neighborhood that's causing everybody to want to sell at the same time here? You know what I mean? And so that would be number one for me. Zach, are there any other ones, that are under the radar for you that, clients probably don't think about in the moment when, like you said, you're there for 15, 30 minutes, and you're oftentimes worried about the things that, you see all these pictures online. Does it look like the pictures online? What are some other things that, you could probably you miss in that window that you should think about?
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with your first one there. I think the only maybe small caveat to that would be maybe if it's one owner that's selling all the properties.
Yeah.
That's not a very likely scenario, but sometimes an owner owns a whole block and he decides that he wants to retire and move off of all those properties at one time. But in the instance that you're describing, absolutely. If you have five single family separate owners that are all listing at the same exact time, there's more than likely an underlying reason why they're doing that at the
Yeah.
same exact time. So I definitely 100% agree with that for sure.
At the bare
Um,
minimum, it at least get you asking the question. I mean, like you said, even if it is
100%.
just the person, one person selling, it's still something to flag and say, hey, what's going on here? And then if that is the reason, okay, cool, proceed forward. If not,
For sure.
what is the reason for these guys? Is crime in the neighborhood going up? Is something else, causing, bad neighbors or something like that people are not wanting to live near? Those are things you don't know exactly, what all could be going on. At least get you some. It's not something I would normally think about. Like I said, I can just picture myself driving down a street worrying about, okay, here's what we're going to see when we get in here, and just not even paying attention to the neighborhood or anything that's surrounding it. You know what I mean? And so just something to, at least get you asking the questions.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. So, moving on to the other kind of under the radar, like you just mentioned, is the, neighbors around you. Just taking a look at the condition of the property as a whole around you, whether that's, two or three doors down to your left, two or three doors down to your right, in between, just taking a look at their landscaping to make sure that they are, keeping up with their mowing, their edging, their landscape beds with all of the weeds and whatnot. Just taking a look at that, just it can provide a pretty clear picture on what the neighborhood and what the area around you is going to be consisting of during your home ownership as well. And property values are 100% dictated by other properties around you as well as your property itself. So again, just got to make sure that you're taking a look at the surroundings around you. That includes noise too. If you're there maybe on an evening showing and they have 10 cars in the driveway and a bunch of noise coming from that house, it's more than likely that that could be a regular thing on the evening time. So just all things you need to be paying attention to when you take a look at that property that you think you want to offer on. And I think the last one would be, like I mentioned earlier, is just being rushed all in all through your showing. Because again, maybe you have two or three more showings after this one, or you have something to do after this. And so you're just kind of going through the motions when you walk through the property. And then maybe you get home and realize that you did really like that property and you didn't go um, detail by detail when you did your showing because you just were, your head's not in it. You're thinking about what you got going on afterwards. And so I would say when you schedule that 15 to 30-minute showing, just make sure that you're locked in mentally. You're locked in on what you want to see and, the things around what you want to see as well, not just the things. So
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one there. I think we all can struggle with that in life in general, just being present when we're doing things because you got a lot of things going on in your brain. And I know I struggle with that myself from time to time and just trying to focus on the task at hand and be there for that. So definitely important, especially because you only get that, that little bit of a window there to kind of look at that property. And other than if you do offer on it, other than, getting a home inspection done, if you decide to go out for that and then kind of your final walkthrough, those are going to be kind of the main times that you even see the property in general at all. And so taking that time to really focus in on the things that you're looking for and making sure that, it checks the boxes, even boxes you may not know that you have, making sure that is good is important. So
And especially too in this market, the last 5 or 6 years, we've only had opportunities to see the property once, do one showing, and you got to make a decision based on that one showing, 15, 30 minutes in that
yeah,
property on if you want to offer 10, 15, 20 grand over ask, waive your inspections, et cetera, et cetera. So it's starting to slow down, obviously. It's slowing down completely from, the peak of where it was in 21, 22, whatever. But obviously that's a big key as well. Just kind of knowing your market and what's going on around the market before you go into the showing, and knowing if you have to make an offer right away, kind of dictate your showing in that aspect as well. So
for sure. For sure. All right, guys. Well, that was a pretty quick episode for you guys today. Just wanted to, highlight some things to think about. Hopefully, left you guys with something that, maybe was not on your radar before when going through houses, but now is. And, every little bit of information helps, especially if this is somewhere where you're going to live for the next several years, somewhere where you're potentially thinking about raising a family, having children. We didn't even get into that side of things. I mean, I know we touched on neighborhood and that side of it a little bit, but just all things to be mindful of and hopefully just put a little bit extra emphasis on a few things out there for you guys, and hopefully this helps. So
absolutely, I think the biggest thing for me on this episode is again just the planning, the preparation aspect of it all. Just make sure that when you schedule that showing that you're locked in, ready to go, and prepared on all the fronts, and maybe not necessarily just going through the motions when you head over to that property. So just be prepared, and I think you'll be a lot a lot happier because of that.
yeah, for sure. All right, guys. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in. Yeah, we'll see you guys on the next episode.
You guys have a great day.